With the Senior Bowl shifting the spotlight onto this year's upcoming NFL draft, there are a lot of questions around how the Bengals can upgrade their trench play this offseason. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans? Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. Today, we're diving into an off-season mailbag, and a lot of you are wondering about the offensive line, the defensive line. We've got some questions about potential extension candidates for the Cincinnati Bengals, and a whole lot more we're going to get to in this mailbag. Brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. And if you're new to the show, hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals this offseason. You'll be the most educated person as we go into the draft, as free agency, on all off-season topics for your office conversations or conversations with other Bengals fans. And feel free to tell them about the podcast as well. And James, we've got some good ones to get to today. We're going to start with trench conversation and going to be dominated by trench conversation. Before we get to the draft, though, Ed from Bellefontaine in Ohio would like to know about a bridge guy. Knowing that rookie offensive tackles can take a little bit of time to acclimatize to the NFL, and you shouldn't expect them to generally hit the ground as all pros, he wants a bridge guy in free agency so the rookie doesn't have a ton of pressure. Who fits the bill? Is it Jermaine Illuminor? Is it Trent Brown? Who are the realistic possibilities?
He named two of them right there. I certainly think Jermaine Illuminor is at the top of that list of affordable option, starting level option that free up the draft a bit, where you don't feel obligated to go offensive tackle with that 18th overall pick. And that should be their mindset when it comes to defensive tackle and offensive tackle. These are deep classes. At offensive tackle, there's going to be a lot of players discussed. We'll discuss a lot of these options that they have over the next few months. But Ed's right. There are very rarely plug and play guys that are going to come in and just be awesome right away. And let's just say you do get one of those at 18. It isn't guaranteed. So having another veteran option and having some depth is exactly what the Bengals should be looking for. And so I think those are two realistic options, two guys that have played right tackle at high levels. And I do wonder, and I think he's going to get paid way more and be out of their price range, but I do wonder what they think of Onwenu from New England as well. Because of his positional versatility, you could argue that, hey, if we sign him and then you end up getting one of these studs at tackle, well, maybe they need a year anyways. And if the guy doesn't need a year and you get him into camp and you realize how good he is, well, Onwenu can play multiple spots, and it just really bolsters your depth there. So I think that's unrealistic. But as far as bridge offensive tackles go, those are two options. Another one, he's coming off of injury. I think it's unrealistic, but could they go after a Jack Conklin? Would they be open to him? I don't know. I doubt it, just because the age, injury, all of those things. Just another name that is going to be a free agent as well.
I didn't even know Jack Conklin was going to be a free agent.
Coming off of a serious injury, but yes. He got hurt against the Bengals week 1.
Some other guys that are not going to excite people. The back end of this free agent class at tackle, if you're talking about a true transition player who you might just need to play maybe half the season or maybe a quarter of the season, there are journeymen that are free agents. Cam Fleming, George Fant, who would be much cheaper, very unexciting, but wouldn't be shocking if the Bengals chose to go that route either, just to have a veteran who they felt could play if they plan to address that position in the draft. But if they sign one of those guys, that does tell you what their plan is for the first round of the draft. If they sign a guy like Jermaine Illuminor or Trent Brown, or one of these guys that's maybe a little bit higher priced, Mike Onwenu certainly would expect to be more expensive than either of those two guys. that could not necessarily tip their first round plans, could be first, second, third round at that point. Or maybe that's a guy they expect to start for them for a couple of years or at least a year, that kind of thing.
Whoa. Maybe I missed it, Jake. He isn't a free agent. I didn't realize. I thought 2023 was his last year. Man, Drew Rosenhaus got him paid. And there's no real out in Conklin's deal until after 2025. Oh, well, never mind. Never mind that. The Browns are going to have to rally around Jack Conklin for sure. And he's going into his age 30 season as well. So no, I thought for some reason, I thought that he was going to be a free agent, but he's got a pretty significant cap hit. So there we go.
On the topic of offensive line development, why we're still talking about it? Is this a development issue? We're going to talk more about the trenches in both sides, but we have a question both from Subtext and on Twitter. On Subtext, it comes from Zach. He wants to know about our thoughts on offensive line development. Is it a coaching issue or is it a player issue based on who they've picked? Are we concerned with future development? And then on Twitter, Matthew thought, what about coaching changes on the offensive line? Are there scheme changes? Is there news tied to Frank Pollock's return for 2024? And I would say no news means that Frank Pollock will be back, James, but what are your thoughts there on offensive line development, scheme changes, and what we should expect there?
Well, the reason why this is so important is so you don't have to sign a Jack Conklin to a 4-year, $60 million deal in June. And so James doesn't get it completely wrong on Locked On Bengals. Man, that's a tough spot to be in. And the Bengals, look, they've spent the past couple of years to try to fix the problem and find guys, whether it's Orlando Brown Jr., or Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, find guys that can help fill the void and help this team win. Quality pass blocking players, right? But we've known that this was coming, where they're going to have to draft and develop offensive linemen. And we saw glimpses of it, I think, with Cordell Volson. We know what Jackson Carman is. There's no developing there. It's just didn't work. And so the issues, I think everyone from Frank Pollock to the front office and everyone in between needs to identify who is going to fit them best and who they think they can get the most out of. Not these projects, which Jackson Carman certainly was. The day of the draft, we knew it, and it felt like a reach at the time. Not a guy like Billy Price, who it felt like you were settling because everyone knew that the Bengals wanted Frank Ragnow. And you don't get him. They were right about him, by the way. Frank is a really, really good player, obviously. We've seen him with Detroit, and he shined with Detroit. Penei Sewell, they had a really high grade on him. It's not like they don't like some of these offensive linemen that end up becoming really good NFL players, but they need to be in lockstep, and something that they haven't done outside of Carman really since Jonah is invest a high pick in an offensive lineman. And so that's part of it too. That's why I think there's so many people looking at that 18th pick and just assuming it's going to be an offensive lineman. And it very well could be. The 49th pick could be an offensive lineman as well. Those two spots I think are prime for offensive tackle. There's certainly a guard that we'll discuss, interior lineman, because he plays center as well. And in JPJ that we can discuss, Jackson Powers Johnson, the Senior Bowl, getting a lot of eyes. So I think part of it is just the quality that you're bringing in. And they were trying to rebuild the line on the fly in free agency. And part of that also has to do with where they were drafting the past couple of years. You're drafting at the end of round one. I think they would have taken Anton Harrison last year. I thought they felt pretty good about him. He didn't make it to them at 28. And so it's a mixture of things. But I do think that, and I want to see this with Frank Pollock, him being lockstep with the front office and vice versa, where everyone's like, hey, this is our guy. Because I don't feel that way about Jackson Carman. And they haven't really used a premium pick on anyone in the Frank Pollock era that you could say, okay, they drafted him, they developed him, and he didn't develop right, and he turned out bad. Well, we don't know that yet. And so that's something I think we'll potentially see starting in this season and certainly this offseason.
We'll stay on the topic of the trenches as we continue this mailbag. A lot more to talk about as far as offensive line identification of talent and development, defensive trenches as well. We'll go there coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. It has a class exclusive Google built in, so you can make calls if you want to. You can make sure that you're listening to the Locked On Bengals podcast. Make sure that your navigation is taking you to the right spots, because they have a 12.3-inch HD touchscreen for you. And of course, it's not just the Rogue. They have the Nissan Pathfinder, which has room up to 8, plenty of cargo capacity. I got to get me a Pathfinder. The 2024 Nissan Armada, well, it's going to change the way you look at full-size SUVs. It's a 4x4 that seats up to 8. It can tow bigger, explore farther with the 2024 Nissan Armada. So whether it's the Rogue, Pathfinder, Armada, get to Nissan today and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com.
James, I'm going to stay on the topic of our previous question here for a moment, because with Zach in particular, he's wondering where the issue is. This is the subtext question. And if you're new to the show, our subtext is an opportunity for you to subscribe to a text-based way to communicate with us. We'll send out updates when we have information. It will come to subtext generally before it hits Twitter or websites. When we have things that we can share, you'll get our analysis and insight that way. And sometimes you can send questions in, like today. But this question, as far as where the issue is, my primary finger pointing, I don't like to finger point, but it goes toward the front office more than it goes toward Frank Pollock or the individual players, because it's hard to blame the players too much when the front office are the ones deciding how they're building the position. And I think they've done an adequate job in free agency, right? Like, they upgraded the offensive line with the additions of, like you said, Ted Karras, Alex Kappa, and Orlando Brown. That made the offensive line better. Those guys stayed healthy. And as the season went on, stability largely showed its benefit, although there were individual games from each of those players that left something to be desired. None of them necessarily world beaters, but all of them at least average at their position. So what are you looking for is an infusion of top-end talent. Like you said, let's find that all-pro, Pro Bowl level player on the offensive line that they don't really have. Maybe Orlando Brown in his best season, certainly not the season he had last year where he was dealing with an injury for a lot of the year, could be a Pro Bowl level player. That could be one of them. But finding some athleticism, finding some upside, finding somebody who can take the line to the next level, and one really, really good piece would really elevate things. And that's where you're looking at this pick that the Bengals have in their first round this year in a very strong offensive tackle class, where you're talking maybe 10 tackles are picked in the top 50, going down to the Bengals second round pick as well. It's a really opportunity to inject some talent and some athleticism for that unit. And I think this is a year where it makes a lot of sense to do that. We see what happens. We'll see what happens in free agency before we get to that point. But I don't think this is a Frank Pollock needs to go kind of necessarily in a vacuum thing, because the guys that Frank has received to work with aren't necessarily the guys that Frank identified in the draft as his primary targets. And the other thing about it is, to Matthew's question, no news on Frank Pollock being retained or leaving doesn't mean he's going anywhere. I would expect right now that he is the Bengals offensive line coach in 2024 until we hear otherwise. And that's how I would approach that. And I don't think we're going to hear otherwise.
I don't think there's like an announcement coming. Like, he could sign an extension, and it's not, they don't need to say anything. So yeah, he's going to be the offensive line coach. I think, what would your reaction be, Jake, just along the athleticism lines, if they drafted an offensive lineman that didn't test in round one, which they've done, and it hasn't necessarily been the best? What would you react? How would you react?
I mean, depends on the player. Obviously, there's always context that goes into it, but that individual factor is something that I would ask them to avoid in the first round. If he didn't test, and there's or opted out of testing, didn't do certain tests that are important to, I mean, these tests clearly aren't important to them enough at some of these offensive line positions where they're willing to make the picks anyway. maybe that's just their approach, but I would ask them to change that approach philosophically and put more weight on offensive line testing, generally player testing. Stop drafting so many players early who didn't test.
Sure. Yeah. Especially, let's just use Tyler Guyton, right? Let's just say, because he's giant, 6'7", 330, probably needs to put on a little weight with that frame, but sure he can. But if he doesn't test, you're like, oh, well, what are you getting? Right. And that's just an example. Jackson Powers-Johnson, I do wonder. I wonder if he plays his way into that 18th pick. I know everyone's going to be focused on offensive tackle, but guard center combo, he might be able to elevate that line for sure.
And could play left guard right away, for everyone wondering. Could make Cordell Volson into a backup. I think he's better right now. And then could be a long-term piece for you at center to stabilize center, as Ted Karras has 1 year left on his deal. And maybe Ted Karras gets a 1 year extension. We'll talk about that potential here in a couple of minutes. But James, we spent a lot of time talking about offensive tackles, the offensive trenches. We got a bunch of questions about, well, how do you pick? Or is there something that would move you off of those spots? So let's combine a couple of questions here. Will Knows Ball on Twitter and Lucas at Scoobies on Twitter. The Bengals have a choice between a really good tackle and a really good defensive tackle at 18. Which would you pick and why? And to Lucas's question, to take it further, are there specific players, I would say besides Brock Bowers, because that's an obvious answer here, that aren't offensive tackle or defensive tackle that you would prioritize over one of those two positions at 18?
Sure. First things first, if it's offensive tackle or defensive tackle, it's one dependent. Let's just say it's the same exact grade. Like you literally have them neck and neck. They're the 10th player, tied for the 10th player on the Bengals board. And they're both young and they both tested and they're both awesome. And they're there at 18. It's tough. I think you would bank it or base it on what you did in free agency to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
How important is it to get this guy, this stud defensive tackle right now? Well, it depends on what they do in free agency, what they've done, how many bodies they've added, how big of a weakness is it, who have they signed at right tackle. I think that can be the tiebreaker. So that's what it would be. I would need to see free agency to say one way or the other. As of today, because Jonah's on the roster, I think defensive tackle is a bigger need. But the moment Jonah isn't, when the new legal tampering period begins, and I think right tackle is as big of a need as any on the team because they don't have one. There is not one on the team. Mm-hmm. Jackson Carman is not your starting right tackle. Can't be. Impossible. Deontay Smith cannot be. Impossible. So who is it? I don't know. I would. So you lean that way to protect Burrow, but I also think it's more likely that they can find that bridge at right tackle, and you feel okay with that, versus finding this stud defensive tackle that can come in and make an impact right away, say Newton or Murphy or one of those guys. And then the second part of the question, I think it's interesting because I wouldn't rule out, I mean, there are a lot of spots that I could see them going. And I forget his name. I've watched the highlights of him all week, the Toledo cornerback.
Mitchell?
What if he's the fifth player on their board? I'm not saying he will be, but he might be. What if he's there at 18? Like, I'm not ruling him out. I'm not going to rule out one of these wide receivers that who knows if they fall. Obviously, you mentioned Brock Bowers. I think that those are spots that you could see it. And the other one, and I've mentioned him a few times on the pod, Jackson Powers-Johnson. I think he's going to be a real candidate at 18. I really do. And you could see multiple tackles there, and the Bengals being like, no, let's go with this guy who can play on the interior right away, and we can still find a tackle that we really like in round 2 or round 3. Now, there's other interior offensive linemen as well that we'll get into that could be targets, but certainly something to consider.
Quinyon Mitchell, the Toledo.
Mitchell.
Corner.
Yeah. Yep.
I think corner, interior
He's
offensive line, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and wide receiver, all things that could be considered. Brock Bowers obviously would be considered. I wouldn't rule out edge completely because of how much it matters to have a lot of guys that can get after the quarterback in the NFL. But a lot of this depends on what they do in free agency. You're right. Whether or not they go offensive tackle, defensive tackle. One, the Bengals will break all ties they will not have a tie situation on their board in the first round. But 2, it'll depend on what happens in free agency. More questions to talk about, James, including veteran extensions and how they'll approach defensive tackle this offseason. We'll go there coming up next. This episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by LinkedIn, who knows that every small business owner often has to ask themselves the same question: what is the one move I can make to take my business to the next level, to elevate my project, to execute the next move I need to make? And they also know that your success can depend on the people that you surround yourself with and the people you hire. That's why they've created the tools to hire the right professionals and find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's not just another job board. Over 1 billion, that's a ton of the world's population available to you to find the right candidates for your jobs. It's the best place to hire. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within just 24 hours. Small businesses rank LinkedIn jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. It's intuitive, it's quick, it's easy to post your job, and you can do it for free right now at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Today's show is also brought to you by DoorDash, and it's a DoorDash night in my house. That's right, because City Bird is about to be here. In what's DoorDash? Well, it's simple. You don't have to leave the comfort of your own home to get that awesome food you want. So maybe you want City Bird, maybe you want some Skyline, maybe you want La Rosa's. Well, DoorDash is going to make it happen for you. That local place that you're looking for, that you're craving, well, DoorDash is the place to go because you don't have to leave your house. And whether the weather's great, whether it's bad outside, it is super convenient. They leave it right on your doorstep or on the stool outside or wherever you want it. And boom, you get that food right now. And it's not just dinner. You can order snacks as well. So chips, dips, nachos, everything you need to make your own nachos for the big game. Well, they have you covered at DoorDash. And right now you can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and use code LOCKED23. It's subject to change and terms apply. So don't forget to do it today. LOCK23 is the promo code for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change. Terms apply.
James, one more question here about the trenches before we dive into some potential veteran extensions we could talk about. And Sergeant Hude wants to know about, will the Bengals be aggressive in the defensive tackle free agent market this offseason? Will they try to repair the position in the draft? I say, James, that it needs to be a hybrid approach. Defensive tackles in free agency getting increasingly expensive, but they really don't have anything on the roster right now. They desperately need to get better, both for starters and for depth, with DJ Reader as a free agent. What are your thoughts?
It's definitely both. And it's both similar to the offensive line, where they've tried. They've added Zach Carter, and they've added Joseph Osai, and they've added Cam Sample. And I think Cam Sample has certainly become the best out of all those guys, but they haven't gotten it right at DT. Zach Carter didn't develop the way they wanted him to, or hasn't yet. They take Tyler Shelvin as part of that Jackson Carman draft, and good Lord, could you have gotten it more wrong with Tyler Shelvin, who's out of the league right now? So I think that's something that they need to do, is find a way to get younger and find key pieces that can be rotational pieces in the draft, at least minimum. But you also have to get better right now because the window is now. And so I could totally see them paying 2 defensive tackles, maybe not a star, but 2 defensive tackles, and then also having it at the top of their needs list and spending a day 1 or a day 2 pick at defensive tackle. So I think the answer is both.
Going to be talking about guys like Shelby Harris again. Going to be talking about Maurice Hurst. Going to be talking about some of the mid-range players, maybe a Grover Stewart. Certainly going to be talking about DJ Reader. Going to be talking about
Stewart.
Sheldon Rankin's going to be debating whether Tier Tart can bounce back after he had a rocky conclusion to the season. Was really pretty bad, even after he was claimed on waivers by Houston. Didn't play in their playoff games for the Texans. So That'll be a
So
debate.
he'll be cheap. So you'll be cheap, huh? Hurst,
Still
you're gonna be cheap.
Projected by Brad Spielberger of PFF tier chart to get 3 years, $10.5 million per year. So still relatively pricey there for a guy who's coming off an up and down year.
I'd be surprised because there's so many of those mid guys. I think there'll be a couple on the outside looking in, but
that is the good news for the Bengals. There's a little bit of depth in the defensive tackle free agent class this year.
I think they signed 2. If I had to predict, go ahead.
I think they need to. Need to. Not an option. I think that's required. Let's get to our next question. This one from Subtext. It's Kristen with a question about some potential extensions a la Trey Hendrickson last year. Are there any potential 1 to 2 year extensions for some of the veterans on this team like Mike Hilton and Ted Karras coming this year?
I think it's interesting because the Bengals, and they could wait. The beauty of this is you could wait until after the draft and just see where you're at. Because if you drafted Jackson Powers Johnson, well, you probably know the writing's on the wall for Ted. But if they get into camp, much like Trey Hendrickson, could they look at Ted and be like, hey, yeah, we could add a year to his deal. He loves it in Cincinnati. It would be nice to fill that void with that guy. Let's say they go with a mid-round guard. Well, that's awesome because especially if he ends up being a quality player. But would it be bad to have Ted Karras around for another year? I don't think that's bad. He's a good fit in the locker room. Mike Hilton could be an option, but I think that's dependent on how they truly feel about Dax. And there's a longer conversation there that we'll have, I'm sure, on this podcast about that, about Dax Hill and his future. So I do think that it is realistic that they could do it with both if they wanted to. I could also see them making both guys play it out, but both guys are good locker room guys. They're not going to break the bank like Cheeto would have or like DJ Reader would have. So I do think it's a more unique situation than we've seen in recent years with some of these guys.
If Mike Hilton was 1 year younger, I would be no questions asked. Let's lock it up for another year. But the way it is, he's playing out his year 30 contract for the Bengals next year. You're talking about signing him for his age 31 season. And I do think that Mike Hilton's still good, but you just never know where that cliff is going to come. And that's where it's difficult. It would be nice for the players to be able to reward them. And for Ted, this goes for both players, really, for what they've done, for what they've been able to do as leaders, for what they've been able to provide as far as stability on the football field and level of play on the football field. But from a business perspective, when we're talking about how much pie there is to go around and all these different things with some of the young players they have coming up that are going to be due extensions and identifying that next core with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, those two being the guys are part of this team going forward. Orlando Brown on this team for 3 more years, right? So there are some pieces are going to be around, and they have to pick and choose carefully where they want to spend money around them because everything is a bit of a zero-sum game in the NFL. And when you're not hitting on draft picks, that's something that obviously needs to change. You can't have more Zach Carter draft picks. And sorry to keep going back to him, but he just is a guy they need to improve on. And you could say the same thing about some of their late round and mid-round offensive line picks where they haven't gotten anything. Until they start hitting those with much more regularity, they need to be very careful about where they're spending their money. And it's a risk. It's the same kind of risk we're talking about with Tee Higgins, for example, where you don't know how available they'll be because of injury history, because of age. You don't know where that age cliff is coming. That's the sort of risk that you're talking about with DJ Reader as well. And those are the difficult decisions that the Bengals have to make with players that are good. Don't get me wrong. It's not anything about the player. It's about their situation in terms of age and injury risk and those sorts of things.
No doubt. And we'll see which route they go. I always lean that way, especially with the way they've had success, but with age in not going that route. But I could also see them doing it with one of these guys if the money is right. It always comes down to the money, of course.
Couple more questions here, James. One question, and we've talked about this one. If the Bengals tag and trade Tee Higgins, what should they expect in return? And would it make sense that this year they should do so in a good receiver class? This question comes from Andrew on Subtext.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. And it's not something the Bengals have done historically, but you look at it, man, it would be nice to be able to have that $21.7 million in cap space. I don't think they let T walk. Could they tag him? Could they trade him? Absolutely. I think they should realistically get a pick between 30 and 40 from maybe Tennessee or from the Carolina Panthers, and maybe another pick later on day 3, but we'll see. Hopefully they can get something like that in return, maybe something even a little more if Tee Higgins does get traded. I don't think it's likely. I think he's probably a member of the team next year on the tag, but we'll see.
And he does make the team better if he is there. So there is that consideration. Tee Higgins is a good football player. If he can stay healthy, we've seen what he can do. It's just a health question. Last one, staying on receivers. This one from Dominic on Subtext. Rank your all-time top 3 Bengals receivers. After Chad Ochocinco-Johnson did this on Twitter recently and left himself at 5 outside of the top 3.
Yeah, I told him his rankings are stupid because they are. What a dumb ranking. He's number 1. And really, this depends on who you ask, because people that watched Isaac Curtis say Isaac Curtis. Mm-hmm. And that's it for me. That's where it ends. If you came up in 2011 and you watched AJ Green, that's great. Chad was better. I watched both of them. I think, so to me, it's Chad, then it's Isaac Curtis, because he is awesome. You have the Isaac Curtis rule. You talk to people that watched him play. You look at the numbers in a non-passing league, all of those things. And then it's AJ for me. And Carl Pickens was really talented. Chris Collinsworth was awesome. There's plenty of guys that would get consideration, but those are the 3 for me.
Jamar, not even close, huh?
He's not even off of his rookie deal yet. Let's chill. Let's chill a little.
He already holds several Bengals records, set rookie records.
Season records, sure. Yeah.
I think that
if he retired tomorrow, is he ahead of Chad? There's no way.
No. If he retired tomorrow, no. But you don't project that. You expect him to play another 4+ years at this level and have some years maybe with some age-related decline later after that 4 years, probably 5-6 years even. You can project comfortably a really strong career for Jamar Chase, but you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
No doubt. That's not an anti-Jamar anything.
Yeah.
It's just he's still young. That's all. Think about it this way. Like Chris Collinsworth had a lot of success young too, and he's on the outside looking in because he only played less than a decade. You didn't have that longevity. I want to see that from Jamar, and I think he'll do it. I think he's a freak and on pace to be the best, but he's just not there yet.
I don't know enough about Isaac Curtis. I know that people say he was awesome. I never saw him, obviously, like you. So recency bias certainly plays a part there for me. But if you're going by most talented that I've seen, it's Chase, Chad, AJ, I think. Or maybe Chase, AJ, Chad if you're doing talented, because AJ had injuries. But Chad was also extremely talented. So if you wanted to do talent-based instead of all-time best, maybe it's Chase, Chad, AJ. And then Pickens would be right there, I think, because he was extremely talented as well. And then I don't know about Isaac Curtis. He's probably right there too.
Sure. And I'm just banking it, basing it on what everybody says about Isaac for sure.
Yeah.
But the Bengals have gotten it right at wide receiver a ton, and hopefully they continue to do that because, well, they like to throw the ball, and rightfully so when you have JB9.
And you got another incredibly strong wide receiver class for them to make a selection from this year. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Early next week, we'll be back with Mike Renner to talk about what we can take away from the Senior Bowl. We'll have more for you between now and then. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.